$420 million in frozen assets, an Interpol red notice, coordinated raids spanning multiple countries. All of it leads back to Benjamin Mauerberger, a man banned from securities markets over 20 years ago, operating under at least two aliases, who built a scam network estimated at $1.5 billion across 4 sovereign states. The contract that exposed everything was signed on New Year's Day, with a government decree pushed through just 7 minutes past midnight. But how does someone flagged by regulators in 2003 go on to capture an entire state? Benjamin Jean Mauerberger was born on January 14, 1979 in South Africa, a detail confirmed by civil registry and passport records, now attached to international arrest warrants. His identity, though, has rarely stayed fixed. Over 2 decades of business filings and legal documents, he appears as Ben Smith, Benjamin Berger, and his full legal name, each used to open companies, sign contracts, or evade scrutiny. The earliest traceable records show him as a member of the Mauerberger family of Cape Town, long established in banking and real estate development. Family business records from the late 1990s list him as a junior partner in property ventures, a position that gave him access to private ledgers and the mechanics of cross-border finance. Official registries in South Africa and New Zealand confirm these identities are not aliases in the criminal sense, but legal names used interchangeably to register companies and open accounts. In 2003, the New Zealand Securities Commission fined and banned him under the name Benjamin Berger, while his South African passport lists him as Benjamin Jean Mauerberger, details now referenced in the Interpol red notice. Later, in Asian business circles, he signed as Ben Smith, a name that appears in company registers from Hong Kong to Singapore. The paper trail is unusually dense for a figure accused of orchestrating opaque financial crimes. Each identity is anchored to a birth date, passport scan, or a director's signature on a corporate filing. This web of legal names and official documents makes it possible to map his trajectory across continents, and it shows that the network did not begin in secrecy, but with a verifiable, traceable individual. The groundwork for the regulatory story that follows was laid years before the first billion moved offshore. The first public warning came in 2003, when New Zealand's Securities Commission issued a formal order against Benjamin Berger, one of the names Benjamin Mauerberger used. The penalty was not minor, a fine of 30,000 New Zealand dollars, and a 7-year ban from working in the country's securities industry. The official order cited misleading investment practices tied to Mayur Swiss Limited, a company he founded in Auckland. While the ban forced him out of New Zealand's financial sector, it did little to slow his ambitions. Instead, the pattern shifted. Companies began appearing in his spouse's name, Catalia Bivor, a Thai national. By 2016, Financia XPCL, registered under Bivor, surfaced as a co-owner in a series of share acquisitions in Thailand, with Mauerberger acting as an advisor behind the scenes. The regulatory trail then skips offshore. In 2020, a foundation bearing Mauerberger's name appears in the British Virgin Islands and was listed in the ICIJ Offshore Leaks database. The foundation's records show it was set up as an intermediary, with Corporate Management Services Limited, the the same corporate service provider later named in the Panama Papers, handling the paperwork. These filings reveal a strategy: move ownership out of direct sight, use nominee directors, and rely on jurisdictions where beneficial ownership is shielded from public view. Throughout this period, no single entity held Mauerberger's name for long. Companies would be registered, fined, or dissolved, only to reappear elsewhere under a spouse, a new nominee, or a freshly incorporated shell. Regulators in New Zealand, the UK, and Hong Kong each issued warnings or sanctions, but the structure kept evolving. The early sanctions and the offshore layering were not isolated incidents. They were the first signs of a network designed to operate beyond the reach of any single authority. At exactly 2 minutes past midnight on January 1st, 2026, the Ministry of Transport's contract for the Bangkok Smart City project was signed. The document's metadata shows it was created by the ministry's own document system, time-stamped to the second. 5 minutes later, the Royal Gazette published a decree. Dr. Naren Sukhum, a senior aide with a reputation for technical precision but little public profile, was appointed as Chief Technical Advisor for the Smart City program. The timing was not coincidental. The contract named Neo Metro Infrastructure Limited, a British Virgin Islands company linked to Mauerberger, as sole contractor. The tender had closed just hours earlier, with only Neo Metro submitting a bid after a last-minute technical amendment locked out competitors. Within minutes of the decree, an internal email from Procurement Officer Anong Fasuk landed in the Deputy Director's inbox, attaching the single bid justification. Calendar invites for a kickoff meeting went out before dawn, while the Bank of Thailand processed a $5 million advance payment to Neo Metro's Singapore account. The MT103 wire confirmation, reproduced in the anti-money laundering case file, carries a timestamp of 0016 UTC, just 14 minutes after the contract was signed. Documents show the entire process was choreographed to the minute, with contract, decree, justification email, payment, and meeting invite all executed in a tight, pre-planned sequence. Dr. Sukhum's appointment gave him authority over the project's delivery office, effectively removing external oversight. The internal memo trail, later obtained through a Freedom of Information request, reveals that the procurement team had already prepared the single bid rationale and the payment authorization before the contract was even finalized. The administrative machinery worked in perfect synchrony, moving public money to an offshore entity before any public scrutiny could intervene. Every step, contract, decree, and payment was anchored to a verifiable document, each with a digital fingerprint. The speed and precision of these actions left little doubt. The system itself had been commandeered, and the financial outflow began before sunrise, on the very first day of the year. 12 days after the Smart City contract was signed, the official machinery that had worked in lockstep to push the deal through began to turn against its own. On January 12, 2026, an internal police memo filed under case number 2026 THP-102 ordered the immediate reassignment of Inspector General Fong Chai Jit, the chief investigator on the procurement file. The memo, stamped confidential, cited organizational needs, but carried no explanation for removing the lead officer from a case involving hundreds of millions in public funds. The next day, the Ministry of Transport circulated a press release confirming the personnel change, but omitted any mention of the Smart City investigation. Inside the project itself, the fallout was even more personal. Engineer Somchai Prasert, a senior technical lead on the smart city build, submitted a formal grievance to the Thai Ombudsman on December 28, 2025. In his complaint, he described how technical specifications had been altered overnight, locking out local contractors and pushing the price tag up by 1.2 billion baht. The grievance referenced unexplained payments to offshore accounts and attached a copy of Addendum 01, the signed change order that authorized the price increase. Prasert's filing was acknowledged by the Ombudsman's office just before the new year, but within days, he was transferred from the project and assigned to a minor maintenance role in the provinces. The cost escalation landed hard. Addendum 01, filed at 0025 UTC on January 1st, authorized an expansion of the sensor network and triggered a budget jump that doubled the original contract. The audit summary posted on the ministry's website in mid-February listed the new figure, 1.2 billion baht, but offered no breakdown of how the increase had been approved. Internal emails, later leaked to investigative reporters, referenced a confidential directive to suppress further inquiry into the procurement process. One excerpt, attributed to a senior procurement officer, warned staff that any external communication regarding the contract must be cleared by the director's office. For the engineers and investigators caught in the middle, the message was unmistakable. Questioning the legitimacy of the contract came at a cost. Careers were sidelined, grievances filed and quietly buried, and the true price of the Smart City project soared without public scrutiny. The backlash rippled through both the workforce and the institutions, meant to protect the public interest, leaving a paper trail of suppressed dissent and unanswered questions. On June 12, 2018, a company named Mauerberger Holdings Limited appeared in the British Virgin Islands registry. The incorporation documents, filed at 9:17 a.m. local time, list a nominee director, Andrei Petrov, whose name surfaces across dozens of offshore filings. The true owner, Benjamin Mauerberger, is never mentioned in public records. Instead, the paperwork runs through Corporate Management Services Limited, an intermediary later exposed in the Panama Papers. By the end of that summer, the BVI company held a certificate of good standing, a standard requirement for opening accounts in European private banks. 3 months later, a new entity, Cyprus-based Offshore Limited, was registered in Nicosia. The Cyprus company's shareholder register, obtained from the registrar, lists the BVI shell as its sole owner. The chain is now set, BVI at the base, Cyprus as the holding layer, and a Swiss account waiting at the top. On April 15, 2019, Credit Suisse opened a private client account for Cyprus-based Offshore Limited. The application included only a passport copy for the nominee, with no supporting documents for source of wealth. A 2024 Swiss regulators inspection would later flag this as a clear breach of anti-money laundering rules. The account, CH930076, was marked as exempt from Know Your Customer checks, a loophole reserved for high-value clients, but one that left the bank exposed. For over 4 years, the account sat largely dormant, used only for routine service fee payments to the corporate service provider. Then, on October 15, 2023, the first major transfer landed, $4 million wired from Mauerberger Holdings Limited's BVI account to the Swiss bank. routed through a Latvian correspondent. The MT103 wire message, later disclosed in a UK court case, lists the reference invoice number 2023-108. The funds arrived with no questions asked. Compliance officers signed off on the transfer using a rubber-stamped approval, never requesting a breakdown of the underlying transaction. The layering was now complete. Money from offshore call centers and procurement kickbacks had moved from a BVI shell through a Cyprus holding and into a Swiss account under the radar of regulators. The technical steps, incorporation, nominee appointment, know your customer light account opening, and a single multi-million-dollar wire were all documented, but the substance of the transactions remained hidden. The system that should have flagged a suspicious pattern instead relied on paperwork and trust. The Swiss bank's own audit, released months later, would cite the case as a textbook example of how know your customer controls can fail when the right questions are never asked. The money did not rest in Swiss accounts for long. On November 2, 2023, a wire for 3.6 million euros left a Latvian intermediary and landed in the account of London Property Holdings Ltd, a company registered just 2 years earlier. The transfer, referenced as property acquisition, matched the exact amount needed for a townhouse at 12 St. James's Place, one of the most desirable addresses in central London. 2 days later, the UK Land Registry stamped the deed. The official title, LU 202-104-567, lists London Property Holdings Limited as the new owner, with the purchase price recorded at £2.9 million. The document, obtained through a court-ordered disclosure in case number 2024 HC 215, traces the payment chain from the original BVI shell through Cyprus into the Swiss account and finally into British real estate. The deed does not mention Mauerberger by name. Instead, the only visible link is the holding company, whose shareholder register, sealed except by court order, lists a nominee director, Andrei Petrov. The same nominee appears on dozens of offshore filings tied to the network. Luxury assets were not limited to property. In 2025, a super yacht Wanderlust, 85.3 meters long, quietly changed its flag from the Cayman Islands to the Marshall Islands and then to Dubai. The yacht's registration filed with the Dubai Maritime Agency lists Dubai Yacht Services Limited as the owner. This shell company, incorporated a month before the reflag, is connected to the same Swiss account used in the London property purchase. Maritime registry records show the transfer of ownership occurred just days after an Interpol red notice was issued for Mauerberger, suggesting a deliberate attempt to obscure the trail. The yacht's bill of sale, reviewed by investigative reporters, includes a payment reference identical to one found in the Swiss account ledger. These assets, real estate in London, and a super yacht in Dubai, stand as the visible endpoints of a billion-dollar laundering operation. Each property, each vessel, is held by a shell company, separated from its true owner by layers of paperwork and nominee directors. Yet every transfer leaves a mark: a wire confirmation, a land deed, a maritime registry entry. For investigators, these are the targets, concrete, registered, and if the courts allow, recoverable. The flow of money, once abstract, now sits anchored in bricks, steel, and glass, waiting for the next round of legal action. On December 3, 2025, the Anti-Money Laundering Office in Thailand issued a freeze order that swept up $420 million in assets belonging to Capital Asia Investments, a Singapore-registered front company at the heart of the Mauerberger network. The order, filed under docket 2025 AMLO 056, named accounts at Bangkok Bank and Capricorn, along with a portfolio of real estate and nominee-held shares. The freeze was not limited to Thailand. In Singapore, the Monetary Authority moved almost simultaneously, invoking Order 2025 MASCAI to immobilize 1.12 billion Singapore dollars across accounts at DBS and UOB. The MAS order, referenced in court filings and Thai enforcement documents, listed Benjamin Mauerberger and his wife Catalia Bivor as parties of interest, and included a schedule of 28 account numbers linked to shell companies and nominee directors. The financial clampdown extended further. In Switzerland, the Office of the Federal Prosecutor opened case file 2025 SC 009, launching a criminal investigation into money laundering and freezing 1.04 billion Swiss francs in Zurich-based accounts controlled by Global Partners, AG, a Mauerberger-linked entity. Swiss prosecutors coordinated with their counterparts in Singapore and Thailand, sharing lists of seized assets and cross-referencing the ownership structures that linked BVVY, Cyprus, and Swiss entities. Banking records, later disclosed in legal proceedings, confirmed that the frozen funds matched the movement of procurement kickbacks and trade-based laundering payments routed through the network's offshore layers. The immediate impact was unmistakable. Wire transfers halted mid-route. Account access was revoked overnight. Asset managers received official notifications, and compliance teams scrambled to produce documentation for funds they had previously waved through. For the first time, the money trail was not just mapped, it was blocked. The enforcement orders, stamped and docketed, signaled that the network's financial machinery was under direct assault from 3 countries at once. The stage was set for the next step: coordinated physical raids and the search for hard evidence. At 8 a.m. on March 2, 2026, police convoys rolled out across Bangkok, Nonthaburi, and Chiang Mai. The operation was planned down to the minute. A network of raids was executed by a joint task force from the Crime Suppression Division and the Anti-Money Laundering Office, AMLO. 6 locations were targeted: Neo Metro Infrastructure's headquarters, the Bangkok residence of Benjamin Mauerberger, the registered office of Capital Asia Investments, and 3 satellite offices linked to shell companies flagged in the AMLO docket. Officers arrived with search warrants referencing the asset freeze order and the AMLO case file 2025 AMLO 056. By 8:15 a.m., investigators had seized hard drives, procurement files, and ledgers, showing payment flows to consultancy accounts controlled by Mauerberger's spouse. The official seizure list included $5 million in advance paid on the Smart City contract, already frozen in the December order, but also outlined new evidence: encrypted communications, a ledger of wire transfers, and a stack of signed single-bid justifications. Later that morning, the Royal Thai Police issued a press release confirming the raids and naming Benjamin Mauerberger as a principal subject. The statement cited ongoing coordination with Singapore and Swiss authorities, referencing the MAS and Swiss prosecutor dockets by number. The public prosecutor's office followed with its own update, announcing that criminal charges for money laundering and procurement fraud were under review. At the same time, court records show that the criminal case against Mauerberger and his associates, first filed in January, remained open but unresolved. On January 20th, 2026, the Bangkok Criminal Court had dismissed an earlier case for insufficient evidence, but the new raids provided a fresh trove of documents for prosecutors to examine. The coordinated enforcement left the legal outcome in limbo. Physical evidence was now in the hands of investigators, but the docket stayed active, and the prosecutor's statement made clear that the search for accountability was far from over. The raids marked a rare moment when the machinery of the state turned its full force on the network, yet the final reckoning remained just out of reach. Today, billions in seized assets sit in limbo, while global regulators race against shadow networks that adapt faster than the laws meant to contain them. As new shell companies appear overnight, the real risk is not what has already been lost. It is how easily the next system could fall. Corruption's reach is measured by the vigilance of those willing to confront it. What would it take to stop the next Mauerberger? Share your perspective below.